that singular week in August 2013 just blew my entire life apart.
You, Chris, were like the golden boy, the golden child. You were Justin, mate, from Hollyoaks.
I fortunately again went on to win best actor, which is
huge. Huge. You went from Hollyoaks to Coronation Street.
Yeah.
Back then, that was like unheard of. Mm-hmm. And I think that was a credit to your work ethic.
I came into the show with like the Duckworth name. That's like a institution in British soap.
You went on to do stuff like Dancing on Ice, which you were just incredible at. I still remember to this day the Crimea River.
All the foundations of what I've built as a career just completely came crashing down, and it was the start of a real downward spiral in terms of my mental health, my confidence.
You recently had a stroke, right?
Yeah. So the nurse came over and she was like, "Can you read this sign to me?" And I was stumbling and stuttering, and I just started crying. I was just like, "What's going on? What is happening?" And she said, "You're presenting symptoms of a stroke." I've developed a level of resilience that is untouchable now. Like the amount of stuff that's happened, you can just keep throwing it at me and I'm just going to keep getting up. It's the possibility of a dream coming true that makes life worth living. And if you've got everything you want, then where's the get up and go? Where's the inspiration? Where do you find the drive to keep going? Whereas I've still got dreams.
Welcome back to another brand new episode of Learning As I Go, sponsored by British Triathlon. Today's a little bit of a nostalgic episode for me, and a really special one because I'm welcoming into the studio a really good friend of mine, Chris Fountain. You might recognise Chris from Hollyoaks and Coronation Street back in the day when soaps were the biggest thing on TV, and he had such a beautiful career until one day he pretty much got cancelled. One event led to him losing his job on Coronation Street and his whole career falling down. And ever since then, he's been trying to come back and fight his way back, and he's finally doing it. He's in the mix with some big auditions now, and he's just overcome a stroke as well and ran his first marathon. This guy is coming back super strong, and today he shares his story. So get ready to sit back and learn another life lesson with Learning As I Go.
Learning as I go, learning. Might get Fountain to do a little remix of this. Learning as I go. Special, very special moment. Very good friend of mine. He's about to walk down the stairs. Oh, he's looking $1 million.
Very good friend of mine.
Wow. Chris Fountain in the building, brother.
Yes, mate.
Welcome, bro.
Fresh from the capital.
Oh, fresh from London, mate. What do you think of my crib?
It's pretty
We've gone up in the world, haven't we?
No, mate, just a touch,
Wow.
Hello, my name is Chris Fountain. I'm here with Scott Thomas on the Learning As I Go podcast.
Woo! Round of applause, please, in the studio. Woo! We've got him in the building,
I know,
man.
it's been a long time coming, this, hasn't
Do
it?
you know what, mate? This one's a little bit nostalgic and special for me because I don't know if you know this. I think you do know this, but I've always looked up to you. I'm
not tall enough for you to look up to me, mate.
No, but you have though, because I remember when I as a kid and I was Ryan's younger brother. And I was going into this soap world that you guys were all in, and like everyone used to knock around together, didn't they? Like the Hollyoaks boys, the Corrie boys, the Emmerdale boys. But you, Chris, were like the golden boy, the golden child. You were Justin, mate, from Hollyoaks.
Yeah, Justin, man, what a character that was. It was such a weird time that for me. Because I don't know if you know this, but like I went straight from high school. Yeah. So I was in like my GCSE year of high school. Yeah. And I got Hollyoaks halfway through that year. So in the same time I was doing my revision, my GCSE stuff, I was going back and forth to work at the show.
Wow.
And it was at the time, it was such a weird thing. Like I'd be in school with all my mates, like who I've been with since like year 7. And then I'm going on like a film set. And like people started recognizing me, and then people started recognizing me at school, and it was just a bizarre situation. Like at the time, I didn't really realize it because I was in the moment. Yeah. But looking back, like how long ago was it now? I started there in 2005, I think.
And you were involved in some massive storylines as Justin. Like, I'm just laughing because I remember when we went on a night out once, and I know this is cringy.
Call me Justin.
Yeah, it was on a night out with Chris, right? And every now and then, because it was
a football trip, wasn't it?
It was a football trip.
Yeah.
Every now and then, I'd slip up and I'd call like Jack Shepherd David, everyone would just ignore it. But I called Chris Justin by accident, and he turned around and went, "Did you just call me Justin?"
I had a bit more about me then. Like before, I had a bit, not an attitude, but like, I was a bit full of myself.
Yeah.
I've mellowed like a lot over the years.
Do you know what? I wanted to talk about that. We will talk about that.
Yeah, of course.
But yeah, you would like, honestly, I mean, the soaps were huge, right? Like, especially Corrie and Emmerdale. And Hollyoaks back then had its own identity.
Yeah.
But you kind of transcended that because of the storylines that you had. You were so big from that soap.
It was a mad one. I think like Hollyoaks had a real bad rep for a long time. And people kind of, because there were a lot of good looking people in it, everyone kind of went, oh, it's just a load of models. Like, and then I think I might be wrong about this, but I'm pretty sure it was Brian Kirkwood who came in, who took over as the exec producer. And he kind of earmarked like a few characters to kind of take the show forward. Unfortunately, I was one of them characters. And he kind of transformed the show, really. And he made it a lot grittier. The storylines were a little bit more, like, they weren't so, like, outrageous and they were more believable. And I was super fortunate that I got put in I was, for probably about 3 or 4 years, I was involved in everything that went on. And I'll never forget going, like, it used to be a joke to us lot going to the soap awards because we never win anything. We just basically turn up, get absolutely like smashed.
Sexiest male, maybe.
Yeah, well, maybe. I didn't even win that. EastEnders got it. But we turn up and we just treat it as a party because we knew we weren't going to win anything. And then I did the storyline with Becca, with Ali Bastian, with the teacher getting with the student. And there was a real shift at that point. Like, everyone was involved. Like, I was doing loads of I was doing loads of interviews with the press and TV. And that storyline ran for quite a real long period of time. And it got so much attention. And then we got nominated for Best Storyline at the Soap Awards. And we won it. And like, neither of us had prepared any kind of speech because we were like, well, we're not going to win.
First time we ever won it.
I don't know if it was the first one. I think it might have been one of the first, but it definitely, I'm not sure if it was the first one, but I made an absolute dick of myself on the stage because none of us prepared anything. Right. So we got up and I was just like, thanks, Mum. Thanks to everybody in the cast. And that kind of snowballed then. And then after that, I fortunately again went on to win Best Actor, which is huge proud moment.
What storyline was that for?
It wasn't a particular storyline. It was just, I think it was over the year. I mean, I did so many different things on that show. Like, I was a bad boy, and then I got sent to rehab, and then I came out.
There was like a drug storyline, wasn't there?
Yeah, there was a drug story.
I think you were like a red outfit. Or
yeah. I got sent
to beds or something.
Yeah. I got sent to. So I got sent off like in the storyline. I got sent off to this like naughty kids camp, and yeah, it was crazy. We were shooting in some like army base near Liverpool, and it was just wild, mate. Like, I think I was probably like 15, 16 then, and like, as an actor, I always wanted to do films and I always wanted to be like in these big dramas and stuff. And at that point, I really felt like I was living that dream because we were on this mad location in the middle of nowhere. We had trailers and all this stuff. And it was just such a crazy experience for like a teenager to go through.
So how old were you when you first got your role?
15.
And did you always want to be an actor? Was that always the plan?
I mean, yeah. I mean, it was a weird one because like at school, obviously, like, I wasn't the most brainiest kid. I was intelligent, but I wasn't like top of the class and everything. I'm absolutely awful at maths. Anything to do with numbers, my brain just completely switches off. And then like as a kid, so my first ever job, like my first ever professional job was playing Gavroche in Les Miserables, which was, it was obviously Les Miserables, one of the biggest musicals in the world. And it came to Bradford, where I'm from, at the Alhambra. And at the time, my mum was working for this woman. And I used to go to work with her, and I was just like a hyperactive kid, and I was dancing and singing, just same as what I'm like now, really. And this lady, Rita, said, oh, Les Mis is coming to Bradford. They're open auditions for the kids. Why don't you go? And at this point, all I'd done was like amateur dramatics, pantomimes, and like school plays and stuff. And I was like, yeah, I'll be up for that. So my mum took me down, and it was such a, I'll never forget that feeling. It was such an intimidating time because there were all these kids who went to drama school and they were there with their agents and their dance shoes and they had CVs and stuff. I turned up with my mum with my 199 pumps from PE that I got from Windsor Warehouse. Standard. And I got there and I learnt the wrong song. So I was like, shit. So we went back home, like stopped off, and we got the VHS of the anniversary of Les Miserables. And we wrote down the lyrics to this song on fish and chip paper. And I went back and I ended up getting the part. And honestly, that was like my first foray into like the entertainment world. And I just came alive and I absolutely loved every second of it. Like being on stage as a 10-year-old. And I don't know if you've seen Les Miserables, but like the old stage used to have this, it used to revolve, and there were these like crazy things that came in from the side to build the barricades. And I was like it was like my playground, and I was on there, and I absolutely loved it. And then the year after I did that, I did Oliver, the Cameron McIntosh production of Oliver at the same theatre, and then I went back and did Les Mis again, and I really got the bug, and I was like, this is what I want to do. But at this point, I'm talking like I was 13 years old, and obviously I started to go through school and all that stuff. But in my heart and in my head, I was like, I'm gonna do this for the rest of my life. This is what I want to do. So I got to a point where I was at an age where I was in musical theatre, especially, I was too young to play an adult's part and too old to play a child's part. And then I started going to a drama workshop in Bury, Carol Godby's theatre workshop. And she was then my agent, and I started doing like bits of TV, and again, just completely fell in love with it. And even through school and stuff, like even at that point, I wasn't like working all the time, but I just had this unwavering belief and knowledge inside myself that like I am going to be an actor. I'm going to be a famous actor, and this is what I'm going to be. And then all of a sudden, Hollyoaks came along and just turned my entire world completely upside down from being a regular kid from Bradford who'd done a few little bits of acting to then being on a majorly successful Channel 4 soap. And I mentioned before, like I look back on it now, and it's just a complete like bizarre situation to go from being where I was to then being all of a sudden you're famous, you're doing TV interviews, everybody recognizes you. And I was just like, it was crazy because I look back on that time, and like I said before, at the time it just felt like a natural progression of what I've been doing. But now I look back and I'm like, that was mental.
Yeah.
To be that age and be that famous. I mean, I'm not talking like Hollywood famous, but for me, it was absolutely incredible.
Huge. You were massively famous.
Yeah.
Like, I remember it like just being like, I don't know, I looked up to you. I was starstruck when I was around you. Like Ryan had all these different soap star friends, but you stood out a lot, man, because of the storylines that you had. And
I think especially because you're not that much older, younger than me, are you?
Just about a year younger.
Yeah. And at that point, Hollyoaks was, their entire audience was young people.
Yeah.
Everyone under 30, like teenagers. So my audience was younger people. So at that point, that's probably why, like, it was such a big deal.
Because you
like,
could identify.
Yeah, if you see Ken Barlow or you see someone from
yeah.
EastEnders, like an older person, like you don't really, it's like, oh, it's them. But when you're someone who's your own age, you're like, oh my God, it's them. But it was I never really like mastered the art of managing being famous. Like certain people who I worked with at Hollyoaks, like Ricky Whittle, for example, like he was just so comfortable around people knowing who he was. And even though I got better at it, like it's still, even to this day, like I don't get recognized as much anymore, but it's still like, I get nervous, like, and I don't know what to say. And like, I never want to come across as rude, but it's like, sometimes I'm just like, oh, I don't know how to deal with this. And that's one thing I'll say about that situation of growing up in the limelight.
You weren't trained for it.
You never really, like, the only press training I had was like, I think it was like a couple of hours when I first started. And it was like, look, if you're doing an interview with someone, one of the tactics they will use when you're speaking and you finish your sentence, they will just sit and look at you. And that prompts you to then just carry on speaking. And that's when you say stuff that you're not supposed to say. But in terms of like mental health and how to be with people and how to address certain situations, you didn't get any of that. So you kind of just left to do it to your own devices, which, I mean, it was a different time then. We're talking like early 2000s, like, well, it's like 20 odd years ago. But yeah, it was like I said, when I look back on that time, there were certain things.
Yeah, you were literally a lad. Plucked from a school in Bradford.
Yeah.
Living in Liverpool.
Yeah.
Surrounded by all this glitz and glamour. It must have been a lot to take in. But one thing that I really wanted to touch on then is like, even you having a little bit of experience doing that theatre training and those shows, one thing that shines through with you, Chris, is like and I hope you don't mind me saying this, some Hollyoaks stars were plucked out of model agencies and just basically said, some of them were like that. Whereas with you, I've always classed you as a serious actor.
I appreciate that.
And I see that in terms of like when you're doing your audition pieces now, I've seen like some of your your videos that you do and everything else. Like you're amazing at accents and you're like, and Adam's a little bit like this.
Adam's incredible, man. I don't think
you take it serious as a craft.
Yeah,
does that make sense?
I think I've got a huge. I mean, this was my first love. I mean, I've like, you know, I'm like with music and DJ and stuff like that. I love that, but this was my first like genuine. Like I was really interested in it. I'd watch films. I'd go to watch plays. I'd read scripts. I'd read all this stuff. and I do have a deep care for like the craft, and even like, you know what I'm like, mate, but when Instagram kind of became like a big thing, like I grew up in a time where there wasn't any social media. It makes me feel like super old when I say that, but that was kind of frowned upon, like especially in Hollyoaks and like those days, like
reality stars.
Yeah, it was huge, and it's not now, but it's taken a lot of adjusting for me to kind of get on that page. Like I've got a lot of followers on Instagram now, but even before that, when it was kind of Instagram was coming into like the fray as like the main social outlet, I was so dismissive of it. I was like, it's stupid. Like, why would you want to walk around just filming yourself? But then the way that the world's gone and the way that things have developed, that is a key tool now to staying relevant, to promoting things and all that stuff. And it's taken me a long time to actually get on that chapter and be like, okay, I have to utilize this. But yeah, like
I spoke to Brooke about this, because even though you're still young, it's almost like you're in that, you're the last sort of, what's it called?
The last generation.
The last generation
yeah.
of the credible sort of like serious actors who looked at it as like a craft, now going into this like reality world where you were probably taught back in the day to kind of only show certain elements of you and only give this version of you.
Exactly.
And I see it all the time with Ryan, for example, like, whereas now in this modern day world,
everyone wants to know everything all the time.
Unpolished.
I do think you've got to be careful with that though. Like I say, I do have my boundaries in terms of what I like. I should probably do more in terms of like when I'm going for auditions, when I'm doing self-tapes, I keep that very private. Like I'll tell my friends and stuff, but like I don't really put that on Instagram, because I think it's just how I've been brought up and how I came up in the industry was like, that's it's quite a personal thing and it's just for the casting director. Whereas now, like, I should probably utilize that more. And I feel like I have started to use my Instagram to a better degree than I used to. But yeah, it's I still find it quite strange. I'm still like, despite the fact that I've spent my entirety of my like teenage and adult life on camera, I'm still not super comfortable speaking to camera myself. Like I still like, I think because
actors don't like playing themselves.
Yeah, sometimes, yeah. But I feel like I said, the younger generation, they've grown up doing that from being 14, 15, whereas I've had to kind of go back and go, all right, I should be able to be comfortable to do this because I've spent all this time performing. But it's not as simple as that, I don't think.
But I think one thing that really stands out with you, Fountain, from day one is that you're just talented. And we used to call you kind of Wonder Boy, a little bit like Rick Fleesh, like where you can do a little bit of everything, right? So obviously you're a great actor. You can sing. I remember you did a show years ago with the girl from S Club 7.
Oh yeah, just the two of us.
Just the two of us. I remember watching you. You did Elvis Presley or something on there.
Yeah, mate. That was wild as well, because that was the first time I'd kind of been taken out of the Hollyoaks situation. Because at that point, I think I was probably 17 or 18. And I've been doing Hollyoaks for a long time. And I was comfortable with all the staff and the crew and everybody. And that was like my home turf, basically. But then I went down to the BBC. And I had to learn how to, like, especially if you've done like reality TV stuff, but like putting the answer in the question and the question in the answer, sorry, and how to work on VTs and all that stuff. And I was at like TV Centre in London in a completely different scenario. But again, like at that point, I've never been fazed by that stuff. Like I feel like I've got more nervous and like more anxious about doing stuff after everything that's happened, which we'll move on to. Like that's kind of changed my mindset a little bit. And I do get nervous now. But back then I just took everything in my stride and I was like, okay, let's go.
You
what have we got?
Smashed it. You had a great voice. You were dancing. And then like, obviously you went on to do stuff like Dancing on Ice, which you were just incredible at. I still remember to this day the Crimea River, like
it's a very proud
routine you did.
Yeah, it's a very proud moment.
We'll go on to that even more. But you are just a talented guy, and you kind of can do a little bit. You've got great rhythm. Do you remember you just talked?
You bought that cajon.
You bought this drum.
You came to get it with me,
from a little shop in Eccles. You went and bought this drum, and next thing it's like beatboxing. So you've always had like a natural kind of ability to be a bit of a chameleon, I think, into different things. Like, where's that come from?
I think that transfers just into, two things. I think where that stems from, it's like, even as a kid, like I've always had a vast different groups of friends. Like I used to go, I had my school friends. And I went to school in Leeds. So a lot of my friends who were at school, I didn't live near. Then I had my friends in Bradford who I lived near. Then I had my friends from football. I had my friends over in Manchester from drama. And I've always kind of like, I don't know whether it's a good thing or not. Like, everyone kind of preaches about just be true to yourself, but I adapt to where I am. Like, depend, like whether I'm at the BAFTAs or whether I'm at football or I'm at the gym or whatever. I change how I behave to my surroundings, and like, I don't know whether that's a good thing or not. But I don't feel like I'm being disingenuous with people. I'm quite comfortable at changing my spots. You know what I mean? But I think. Yeah, it's a strange one.
I feel
really.
like something you mentioned before, and I remember this about you. It was your self-belief. You always backed yourself.
Yeah.
Like whether it be on the football pitch or whatever it was, you had this confidence, which sometimes did borderline on arrogance, which I kind of looked up to anyway, because I've got a little bit that I'm a locker.
Yeah.
But it was almost like you had this underlying sense of belief. Where did that come from?
I don't really know where it stems from. Like, stuff does come like naturally to me sometimes, and I think like when you look at people, like I really look up to Jack Grealish, to be honest. Like, I like how real he is, and he backs himself, and he's like, I always believe in myself, and sometimes it does border on arrogance, but I think it has to sometimes, because if you don't believe in yourself, and this is one thing my mum always said to me. She said, if you don't believe in yourself, no one else will. And like, I was never really pushed into doing drama or acting or anything that I was good at and I wanted to do. Like, and listen, how close I am with my mum. She, whether it was football or ice hockey, or I remember she took me down to audition for Sylvia Young's, like, and that's a lot of money to, like, back then. Like, I'm not from a rich family or anything, and like train tickets and hotels and then going there. And it was all, anything I wanted to do, she pushed me to, and was like, not pushed me to, but like if I said, I want to do this, she'd be like, all right, well, then we'll do it. I'll do everything I can to make that possible for you. And I just think I've just always had this unwavering belief, which has now changed a little bit for obvious reasons, but I've always had this belief in myself that if I know not necessarily how talented I am, because I do question that. And like, despite the fact that I put on this, not so much a front, but I have my serious, I'm the person that doubts myself more than anybody else. But I do have this belief that I can, I'm very confident in not only my talent, but my work ethic. Like, I can wholeheartedly say that like the majority, maybe not if all of the people that I've ever worked with in any situation, whether it be Dancing on Ice or whether it be Hollyoaks or Coronation Street or working for Adam in Oh My Glaze, like, if I'm given a task, I will work my absolute arse off to make it happen. Do you know what I mean? Like, my work ethic is unrivaled, and I know that. I don't think I always am proactive enough sometimes. I think like the last 10 years especially, I've kind of just sat in a bit of a slump and not made things happen and just kind of waited for things to come to me. But if I got a job tomorrow, no one could question like how much of I don't put 100% into everything. Like, for example, Rain Man. Like, there was a whole story of that. That's, I don't know if that's for now or for another time.
This is a show you did at the Lowry, right?
Yeah, you can see it. Right?
Amazing.
Yeah, and I was supposed to be in that show. So basically, it was me and a guy called Paul Nichols, who unfortunately got ill just before the show. Right. So he had to pull out. Yeah. So they had two kind of big names. I don't like to call myself that, but they had two big names like leading the show, and we took over from another two actors who did the first leg, and it became, because Paul wasn't doing it, I then felt like I had to take that whole show on my shoulders. And it was a big show. Like, it was more dialogue than I've ever had to do. I was on stage for pretty much an hour and a half.
Never heard an actor speak so much
without a break, man. It was intense. But every single show, I'm a firm believer in the fact that we would go to the Lowry where there were 2,000 people, and then we go to another theatre in Weston-super-Mare on a Wednesday matinee when there's probably 70 people. You have to give the same level of performance when you've got 2,000 people or when you've got 10 people, because in the same time, those 2,000 people and those 30 people have paid the same amount and they expect to see the same show. You can't improve your performance when you're doing a bigger audience. It's got to be consistently top level performance all the time. And like, I worked my ass off. I worked myself into the ground that I had to take like, at one point when we were in Scotland at one point, I had to take 3 days off because I just completely lost my voice. And you saw how much energy I put into that. And I feel like you have to do that. You can't just turn up when it suits you. You have to be there like at the top level at all times.
Yeah, it sounds like once you get an opportunity, you seize it.
Yeah.
But then sometimes you're not the best at creating the opportunities.
Exactly, 100%.
Well, talking of opportunities, and this is unheard of, by the way, that you went from Hollyoaks to Coronation Street.
Yeah.
Which is like going from Leicester City, right, to
Leicester.
I don't know.
Well, yeah, Leicester's all
Well,
right. Yeah.
maybe
Could have said someone worse.
Maybe, yeah, because Leicester, Danny Simpson will kill me.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
that's all right, let's say West Brom. Right?
Okay, West Brom.
Right, to
Up the
Chelsea
baggies.
or United.
Yeah, yeah.
Do you know what I mean? It's
Yeah.
like, that's how big a move it was. And it was pretty much unheard of
Yeah.
back then. Do you know what I mean? Because now a lot of people move around soaps
Yeah.
from one soap to the next. Whereas back then, that was like unheard of.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that was a credit to your work ethic and the fact that you just won Best Actor and everything else.
Yeah.
And you went in as Tommy Duckworth, as the legendary Vera and Jack Duckworth's grandson. Grandson, which is a massive storyline to
Yeah,
go
it
in
was
on.
wild, man.
What was that moment like for you?
It was interesting because I left Hollyoaks and like I probably could have stayed there for a few more years, but I got to like I wanted to be an actor because, like I said, I love the craft and I wanted to play different characters. And like, listen, like there's people who stay in shows for an amazing amount of time, and that's just not what I wanted to do. I felt like my time was up at Hollyoaks. I was in a good place. I was 21 when I left.
Yeah.
And when I came out, there was all this talk of me going off to Hollywood. And I mean, I never said that, but I think it's just kind of a natural thing that the press say when someone
Always
leaves a
happens
show.
to
They
them,
go, oh, yeah, they're going to try and crack Hollywood. Don't get me wrong. I would have loved to have done that. And I kind of believed the hype a little bit. And I was like, I'm going to come out of Hollyoaks and I'm going to do this, and this. And I auditioned for some crazy stuff. I auditioned for like Lord of the Rings and all these mad things. And I just didn't get anything. And it was like that realization. I was like, oh shit. Like I've just spent 7 years in a show thinking that I'm going to come out and I'm just going to waltz into all these jobs. And it just didn't happen like that. And I was a bit scared really because I came out and I just didn't get what I wanted to get. I did a play in London, and then I had about 2 years, no, I think it was maybe more before I got Coronation Street. And I was starting to panic. Like the panic really set in because I was like, shit, that might be it. That might be I might not ever get another job. Wow. But then I got a call from Phil Collinson, who I absolutely love, and he wanted me to come and test for Coronation Street. And I spoke to my agent, and like to be honest, at the time, even though I wasn't getting the jobs that I wanted, like I always kind of wanted to move away from soap. But we spoke, and it was like this is it felt like a step up, really, just for more viewers and more exposure. And it was such a surreal moment. Like, I mean, we've told this story before about I met Ryan at the train station, and he was doing the screen test with me. And I got there, I read with Ryan and Michelle Keegan, and then within a couple of weeks, I started. And it was just mad. I had this, it was quite a bit of pressure, really, because I had this I came into the show with like the Duckworth name. That's like a institution in British soap. But I absolutely loved it. Like I really enjoyed. It took me a while to get used to because it was completely different to Hollyoaks. I was working with a lot of young people, and we didn't have our own dressing rooms. We used to like muck in this, like there was a boys' dressing room and a girls' dressing room and a green room. Whereas obviously you get to Coronation Street and there's like people who've been there for 50 years. And it was kind of interesting getting used to that dynamic of stuff. But again, I just applied the same mentality that I had to work hard. And it was just, it was an eye-opener for sure.
Yeah, and I think fair play to you though, Chris, because you are such a normal, like, local Bradford lad. But then to be thrown into those situations where you're in a green room with people like Bill Roach and everything else, like...
Who's absolutely lovely,
yeah, you had to grow up, and you had to grow up quite quickly.
Yeah. Listen, don't get me wrong, I wasn't like a model student.
No,
like I got into trouble for being late a few times.
Well, you live with me and Ryan.
I did, yeah.
So
the thing is, one thing about me is like, I am absolutely shambolic on a morning. Like I find it, I've got better, but I find it very difficult to wake up. Like if you meet me on a morning, like I've just got nothing. I've got like a full zombie. Like I get up, and if people speak to me, I'm just like it just doesn't. I'm not good in the morning. I did get in. I remember getting into trouble.
Yeah, that's all part of it. I remember the first day that you walked into Ryan's house, like it was yesterday. You walked into Ryan's house, and you did a little spin on the floor. On your ass.
You sound like an absolute
and then
weirdo.
just went, I'm here, boys. And Ryan just looked at me and went, what have I done here? What have I took on here? But then we had such a beautiful like time, and it was great to see like you and Ryan bond as well. And I felt like you learned a lot from each other. And I think you learned a lot from Ryan as well, from like living with him and everything else.
100%. I mean, it's like you said, like I was always around Ryan, like through different situations, like with football trips and soap awards and like seeing people at events and stuff. But one of the best things I think that came out of my time on Coronation Street is that like Ryan's one of my, like, it makes me emotional, man. Like he's like, I've got like some very close friends, but Ryan, especially over the past like 10 years, we've been through so many different situations, bad things that have happened to him, bad things that have happened to me. And the bond that has forged throughout that time, I'm so grateful. And even with you and Adam as well, like, because I've spent so much more time around you, like with Adam and the kids and with Roman and Lucy and all
Part
that.
of the family now, aren't you?
That's what it is. I really feel like it is like my extended family. But like I said, man, I can't, like the times, like aside from my mum and like some of my other close friends, like Ryan has really, really been there for me. Like dragged me up out of like holes and just, I can't speak highly and like I can't be like thankful enough for what came from getting into Coronation Street, even though that ended in absolute disaster. One of the best things that came out of that was the relationship that me and Ryan have got from that.
Yeah, I think that's because Ryan sees the goodness in you, like all of us do, Chris. Like you've got an amazing heart, and I really wanted to talk about the start of your journey to kind of put it into perspective, like this crest of a wave that you were riding, like going from being the star boy at Hollyoaks, winning Best Actor, to then going to Coronation Street, getting this massive kind of entrance as Tommy Duckworth, and then just everything else around it, Chris. You were quite like, you were really, I remember you were really well organized with like your finances, and you had like a really solid like life, right?
Well, I did. Do you know what?
You were quite smart.
I've Benjamin Buttoned my career, basically. Yeah. Like, you see a lot of actors and they will start there and then gradually will build up to get to where they want to be. Like, I started there. I mean, obviously, there is like Hollywood and movie stars, but like I started at one of the highest points of my career. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. And I've kind of gone that way, really. And it's strange because despite the fact that I worked incredibly hard and like, with like the long shifts on Hollyoaks and like I put everything into it. It's every single scene I put everything into it. But I feel like the first, like from being 15 to being 21, 22, 23, like it was quite easy. It was quite an easy life. Like despite the fact that my hours were long and I was doing like a great deal of work, I feel like it was quite easy for me. Like I was doing what I wanted to do. I was earning a lot of money. I had a great profile. Like I was doing great. I've done more learning on the other side of it. And like you said about like with my finances and stuff, like I'm not great really in terms of numbers and organizing stuff and being like, I'm a shocking businessman. I'm not an entrepreneur in any way, shape or form because I never had to be. I've never had to grind and go, right, how can I make this opportunity? Because like that first long period of being in work, I was going to work and getting paid really well for it. So I never really had to kind of like develop that mindset of how can I make this and this happen? I never really had to do that. Whereas now I'm feeling like that's exactly what I'm having to do. But I've got no kind of point of reference to go, well, when you did this and when you did this, but my mum was like instrumental in that for me. And the one thing I've got in terms of sense like that is I don't really spend a lot. Like when I've got money, like I'll look after my friends but like I'm at a point now where I have to be like frugal with my finances because I've not got much coming in. In terms of work. Like I've still got properties, I've still got
But even
Like-
when you were though, back then, I remember you were still smart. Where you didn't overspend money and everything else.
I just don't I just buy what I need. Do you know what I
Yeah,
mean?
yeah.
Like obviously when I was younger, I'd buy a few random like flashy bits here and there.
Yeah.
But like, I wasn't bothered about going and buying a mad car or a mad watch or all this stuff. Like I never really overspent and went like super flashy with things.
Yeah.
Which has kind of served me well really over the time.
Yeah,
But
of
yeah,
course.
like I said, my mum was instrumental in that, and she was really great in like we got an accountant and we made sure that everything I had, I didn't owe anything to anybody. Like I wasn't buying things on finance. So it was just like everything I've got, and I don't have to worry about paying this person or that person for stuff.
Yeah, your mum listen, your relationship with your mum is incredible. Linda's just the best. And I want to talk about her in more detail, but let's go to the life-changing moment for you where...
Which one?
Oh God, yeah. There's been two big ones, haven't there, really? But obviously, you're in Coronation Street. You're at the peak of your fame. You're a credible actor, and you're really talented. And then this moment happens in the press where basically you pretty much get cancelled overnight.
Yeah, but I think that was before cancelling was a thing, really.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, look, you know the story inside out. Like, I've never shied away from the fact that I shouldn't have been there doing what I was doing, especially considering the fact I was on a primetime ITV show. But like we've touched on, like if I'm interested in something, like I go fully into it, whether it be mountain biking or music production equipment or DJing. Like if I really like something, I'll go all in.
Yeah.
And I remember like, it was at a time when Don't Flop was absolutely massive, this whole battle rap thing. And I
was with you, mate,
exactly,
in the house. We were watching it on the videos all the time.
Yeah.
These guys rap, basically, Don't Flop was like a bunch of like local rappers, right?
Yeah. Well, from like national, they were all over the place. Yeah. And I loved it. Like, it's an art form, especially. I mean, listen, if you look at it and if you've never seen anything like Don't Flop or any kind, you've never seen a battle rap before, you're going to watch it and go, Jesus, like, what they're saying is horrible. But in that culture, you're kind of trying to be as outrageous as possible. But then not just the outrageous bits, like the actual artistry of it and the rhyming schemes and the flows and all that stuff. And I've been a huge hip hop fan since I was 12 years old. I used to listen to Eminem on the bus. I was massively into grime and garage, and like I've got a real respect and an affinity for that genre of music and the way it's made and the way it's developed. But unfortunately for me, like I actually reached out to one of the guys who was on Don't Flop, and I like to think I can rap a little bit.
You could rap.
I mean,
we used to battle all the time.
Yeah, I mean, I don't really do it anymore for obvious reasons, but
that's
like,
what we used to do after a night out. We'd come in, we'd put a beat on, and we start rapping. Honestly, that's all we do. Yeah, and you were sick. Yeah. You were
Listen,
good.
I used to sit and I used to write rhymes and stuff, and I've got some stuff that I'm still quite proud of. But
like I said, part of that culture though is saying the most outrageous thing possible to someone with no like meaning behind it. It's like you see it when
it's a release. Like it's like you listen to, like I say, to reference Eminem again. You listen to some of the stuff he says. I remember he used to do them skits on his album, and he was like, obviously, I'm saying these things. That doesn't mean I'm going to go and I'm not going to kill my mum and put her in the boot of my car and throw her off a cliff. It's just a way of expressing myself and what I'm going through. And like, listen, I've not been through anything as bad as what he went through. But yeah, so I kind of like got my rapper's head on and spoke to this guy, and he was like, "Oh, look, there's a studio where like local MCs come down, and everyone has a smoke, and we put beats on, and they freestyle." And I was like, that sounds great. So I remember I went down there a couple of times, and there was some really talented MCs there. And I was kind of in awe of it. And I was like, I can do that. Like I want to like get involved. And the way it happened was like, I had some kind of sense in the fact that I was like, well, I can't just do this like as me. I have to, like, so there's this mask, and they put this mask on, and I was like, oh, now I can kind of like get involved. And the way it was kind of portrayed in the press was that like there was this masked rapper that everybody was trying to find out who it was. No one knew who it was until it went in the press. And it basically made it out as though I was part of this like dark subculture, like writing lyrics about violence towards women and all this stuff. And listen, I've held my hands up plenty of times and I apologized, but to put across, like, it wasn't like, that's not me as a person. Do you know what I mean? I was there.
You was a character.
All these things going on. I was listening to these people, and so I'm going away. And then I came back. I was like, right, I'm going to get involved. And it wasn't. None of it was written. None of it was like, oh, I've sat and thought this out. Like, some of the stuff I said was absolutely absurd.
Yeah.
It was terrible. It didn't rhyme. It didn't make any sense. But obviously, some of the bits that were put out there were horrendous. I look back at that now, and like, it makes me feel sick. Do you know what I mean? Like, there's no, what's the word? There's no apologizing that kind of makes that right. But when you put it in context, like, you look at certain people who've done certain things and
Chris, let me put it into context. I understand the rappers world. I understand. And if you understand that, you know completely that it is in context of what you're doing as a character in a freestyle. That you say things that don't even make any sense. You just do things that rhyme.
It's coming off the top of your head.
It's not your thoughts. It's just like, what can rhyme with that word? Does it? Well, is it going to get a reaction?
Exactly.
And it's nothing to do with your viewpoints. But however, I can also understand from someone in the mainstream society why they might, if they don't know that, they might go, why is Tommy Duckworth coming out with those kind of words?
It makes me deeply, deeply ashamed to see that stuff and to think about what I was saying. And listen, no one is responsible for that other than me. Do you know what I mean? But what comes off the back of that is I was absolutely destroyed by the press, to the point where, and this is something that still kind of sits with me. Like, my family's always been incredibly proud of me. My grandma, before she passed away, my granddad, my mum. And it feels like I let them down in that situation. And I've had this conversation with my mum, and she's like, that's not how I feel. But I feel like I was kind of flying the flag for my family. And then all this happens, and it kind of, I'll never forget, there were reporters like chasing my granddad down the street when he's going for his bread on the morning, saying, what would his grandma think about this? And they were outside my mum's house. They were going to my ex-girlfriend's family. And it's just like, at the end, listen, I can't say that there's anything right with what I did. But I was blown away by the reaction from it. Like, I knew there was going to be a reaction, obviously, because it was a big deal at the time, but it was just,
the press just basically saw blood, didn't they?
It was mental. I didn't know what to do. Like, I can kind of accept it because I'm in the public eye and I've fucked up, basically. And so I can take that on the chin, even though it was dramatically, like horrendously difficult for me. Like, it's not a woe is me thing. Like, I should accept it because I messed up, so you got to deal with the repercussions. But when you're going after my granddad and after my mum and my family, I was just like, oh my God. I was like, what is going on here? And I just, that singular week in August 2013 just blew my entire life apart. Like, all the foundations of what I've built as a career just completely came crashing down. And it was the start of a real downward spiral in terms of my mental health, my confidence, just everything, basically.
So what actually happened, Chris? So you obviously lost your job at Corrie straight away. And then what was the rest of the industry like towards you? Could you just not get any opportunities? Did you feel cancelled?
At the time, I didn't realize the implications it was going to have. I thought, like, obviously,
it'll cool down.
Yeah, I thought so. And like, obviously I lost my job with Coronation Street, which was a huge blow. But I thought, okay, this will settle down. I've done something wrong. But for me, it's like, obviously what I said, like I've said before, was absolutely abhorrent and wrong. But I didn't do anything illegal. I didn't kill anybody. I never hurt anybody. Like, you see some people who got away with some things and are still at the top of the game working. And like, whether I dealt with it the right way in terms of not doing any, because I did my apology and then the strategy was just don't say anything else. I sometimes look back on that and think, was that a right approach? Should I have come out more? Should I have been more vocal about things and taken it a different route? But like, that's happened now, so I can't change that. But it was just, it was crazy because I didn't know what to do. I didn't know, I thought that after a certain amount of time, it would calm down. But then I found myself in situations where I was getting auditions, I was going for things. I'll never forget, there was one audition that I went for, and I went down to London and I met with this director. And honestly, it was probably one of the best auditions I've ever done. Like, I sat with this guy for like an hour before we even read any script, and we got right into it in terms of character and the choices and everything. And then I did this scene, and it just went fantastic. And I came out of the audition, I was like, yeah. I was like, I must have got that.
Wow.
I didn't hear anything for like maybe a month, and I called my agent and I was like, did we hear anything from that audition? And she came back to me and she was like, oh yeah, the director loved you, but the producers thought it was too soon after everything. And I was like, oh, okay, so this is still having an effect.
So it's literally 4 weeks now until my first ever sprint triathlon, and I have been putting the work in. It's not been easy, but I feel like I've come out of my comfort zone. I've been swimming, biking and running, and I've just been working on my transitions. And don't get me wrong, I'm not the finished article, but I feel proud already that I'm going to cross that finish line on the 29th of July, and I'm going to be doing my absolute best to get my best possible time. But I just want to say thank you to everybody who's been on this journey with me. So many of you have been tagging me in all your stories, documenting your journey. And I can tell that so many of you have just seized this opportunity. So I can't wait to see you there in Sunderland. We're all going to be there together. We're going to cross the finish line together. And I just want to say, keep doing your thing and make sure you finish strong. I'm going to be finishing up documenting the sprint triathlon on this podcast, but you can catch up on my journey and all of my training over on Instagram. So make sure you head over there, scott.thomas. And yeah, keep tagging me your stories, guys, and let's do this together. So obviously, your confidence has been knocked, your whole world's been rocked. Mm-hmm. But one thing with you, Fountain, that I do look up to is that, all right, you can visibly see that you're probably not the same person that you were when you were in your prime or anything else, but you've still managed to stay here, if I'm honest. Yeah. Because if anyone, I'm not, I hope you don't mind saying this, but if anyone else went through what you went through, like, it'd be tough for them to see a way out of it.
Yeah.
Whereas with you, Fountain, you've somehow managed to bounce back, right? I'm not saying it's been a straight bounce back.
No way.
But the person who just walked down that stairs before is the strongest I've ever seen you before. And I can see that you're coming back. Do you know what I mean?
I think, like, look, I've been right at the bottom.
Yeah.
But I feel like you learn your biggest lessons when you're at the bottom. You don't learn anything when you're doing really, really well.
So true.
And so, like I said, don't get me wrong, like, I'm not Mr. Positive all the time. But what I have learned is that I've developed a level of resilience that is untouchable now. Like, the amount of stuff that's happened, you can just keep throwing it at me and I'm just going to keep getting up because there's no other option, I don't think. Like, I remember reading a book years and years ago, The Alchemist by Pablo Coelho. And there's one passage in that book that stuck with me throughout my life, really. It says, it's the possibility of a dream coming true that makes life worth living. And if you've got everything you want, then where's the get up and go? Where's the inspiration? Where do you find the drive to keep going? Whereas I've still got dreams. I've still got dreams that I want to fulfill. And no matter how much I kind of get knocked down, whether it be with my health or whether it be with the press or anything like that, the most important thing that I've learned is you have to keep going. And it seems obvious, but you don't always feel like keeping going. Like, I don't always feel like keeping going, but in the past few years, like, I've developed and I've kind of forged this, like, ability to, like, even with anything, like last night, for example, I had a lovely day out with my mum, I had a roast and everything. We got home, we were going to watch a film, and I was like, I need to get a run in. And like, everything in me was going, nah, it's fine, just chill. And I was like, nope. And I've developed that switch to be able to go, get up, go and do it. Do you know what I mean? And that's one of the biggest lessons that I think I've learned.
It's so easy to say that you need to go through the tough times to become the person that you're meant to be. But it's so true. Like some of my darkest moments in my life have forced me to grow into the person that I am now. And if we did have it all plain sailing, we wouldn't necessarily get to where we need to be.
Yeah.
And it's funny you say that before. It's like one of my businesses, Food Thoughts, as a startup, we kind of grew so quickly.
Yeah.
And it was a bit of a Hollywood like kind of rise to.
I remember
Hollywood
it just
rise.
went from there to there with
Yeah. And it's almost like now we're having to go back through the whole startup thing again. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah.
Because sometimes when it is too good to be true, there's foundations that need to be laid beforehand.
Exactly.
And it seems like now, maybe, I'm not saying you did rise too early, but maybe
potentially.
Maybe there was lessons that you needed to learn now as a human, as tough as it is that you've had, mate, by the way, because it's not been easy. Like you've had it so difficult. But I can see now, like I said before you came on this podcast, I went, one thing about you, Chris, now is you are so resilient and things come your way and you just seem to be like, right, okay, how are we going to deal with this now?
You got to. That's it. Like, don't get me wrong. Like I have my own moments. Like when I'm on my own and I've got things going on.
Same.
And you just, every now and then it just kind of hits you like a ton of bricks and the anxiety's going and I'm just like, oh my God, and all this. But going through what I've been through, it just becomes like, you kind of just get a natural sense of like, well, all right, well, we've got to keep going. Because
I don't know if you're a little bit like me, Fallon, but I can always feel and see my potential. I might doubt myself.
Exactly.
And I might have those
That's
moments
so true, you know.
where
That's
I feel a bit of like imposter syndrome, but deep down I go, yeah, but I know
it's that
what.
belief that we were talking about before, like that belief used to sit there like fully on fire going, bosh, we're here, we're going to do this, that and all the other. That fire's definitely shrunk, but it's still there. It's still lit. It might be a little pilot light, but it's still there. And so, like I said, that like I've had times where I've really sat down with myself and got in my thoughts and questioned, like, do I just give this up? Because do I just give up acting, choose a new career path, and just crack on? But it's impossible. It's impossible because I don't feel like I've achieved what I can achieve. And so I'm not going to give up and I'm going to keep going and I'm going to keep going for auditions. If I don't get it, I've just got to keep going. I've got to keep working. Look, even after I had the stroke, which I'm sure we'll move on to, like my speech coming back and all this stuff, I started going back to class. Like, I've not been to class for years. And I sat down with a friend of mine and we had a talk and he's very blunt. And he's not one of them people that's going to sympathize with you and that, like, he'll sell you exactly what it is. And we were talking about this and I was kind of being a bit like depressed and like, so I was like, oh, I'm not getting this and I'm not. And he says, right, well, you know what you do? You make it impossible for a casting director to not give you that part. You make it impossible. You blow every single other person out of that water and you make it yours. And that stuck with me and it rang around in my head and I was like, right, okay. So I was like, right, I started looking up acting classes and I went back to class and it's definitely helped me. It's definitely helped me like stay sharp, like between like auditions and self-tapes and stuff. So I'm not going to give up until I get there. And I can't. And whatever gets thrown in front of me, I'll just jump over it and keep going.
Yeah, and I feel like this fighting mentality you've got now, I feel like it's kind of new. And I think that's obviously come because recently, Chris, like for the listeners who don't know, you recently had a stroke, right? Yeah. Which I know you're going to explain more details now, but I know that you woke up one morning and you couldn't speak. Is that right?
Yeah. So I'd got to a point like, so I don't know if you saw, like probably 2021, like with the lockdowns and everything, I did like this whole like lifestyle adjustment where I started eating really well and I lost a load of weight and I started running and I started journaling and just got into a really good frame of mind. That's kind of gone up and down since then. But I think by having a year of doing that, I developed the tools to kind of, to look after myself properly, mentally and physically. And so I'm probably at the moment fitter than I've ever been. And at that, when I had the stroke, I was fitter than I've ever been. I was training all the time. I was running. And then one day, in August last year, I went out the day before, did a 5K. It was really hot. And mate, it's so weird. I can remember everything that happened. Like I had a Chinese the night before because I'd done a big run and I was like, beat a PB or something. I was like, I'm going to have a Chinese. And then went to bed. And then the next morning, I woke up and my phone was ringing, as it usually is on a morning. It's my mum saying hello. And I picked the phone up, and I told you I'm not great on a morning, but I picked the phone up and I could understand what my mum was saying, and I could kind of get little bits of conversation out, but there was something that wasn't quite right. And I was like, this is weird. I went, Mum, I'll call you back. And then I was like, that was weird. I was like, I must just be tired. So I got up, and even when I wasn't speaking, I was walking around. I was like, I don't feel right. It was like something not quite right here. And I started trying to say things. So I was like, there was a towel over the back of the door, and I was looking at that. And in my head, like my internal like dialogue was perfect and was fine. It was going, that's a towel. So I was like trying to say towel. And I was like, it's like 12. I was like, what is going on? I'm looking at TV, and I was like trying to say television. I couldn't say television. I was like, this is weird. I was laughing at it. I was like, have I just woken up and just forgotten how to speak? I was like, this is mental. So I called my mum back. And like I said, like I wasn't completely unable to speak, but it was just very bizarre situation. And I rang my mum and I was like, look, I'm really sorry. You're going to find this really strange, but I can't speak properly. She was like, what do you mean? I was like, well, I can't get my words out. And she was like, well, you need to ring the hospital then. I was like, no, I'm not ringing the hospital. I was like, I'm fine. Because every other facet of my body, my brain, my legs, everything I didn't feel ill. I just felt something wasn't right. So I was like, I don't need to ring the hospital. I was like, I'm going to go to the gym. I'll have a coffee. And anyway, so I was about to go to the gym, and I was just like, something's telling me I'm going to call the hospital. So I rang them up, and that's when it all kind of went a bit tits up, really. Like I spoke to the guy on the phone, and he was like, what are your symptoms? And I couldn't tell him, even though in my head I had everything prepared that I was going to say, but I couldn't make it work. It was like my brain and my mouth weren't connected properly. So then I started panicking. Then I was like, I can't speak properly. And he was like, well, asking me all these questions, and I was like, and the thing is, it's weird. I couldn't answer his questions, but I was able to say, I can't answer what you're asking me. It's really difficult for me to speak. I could say that. But then he asked me for my address, and I know my address, but I couldn't give him my address. Jeez. And at this point, I was just like, this is really strange. So eventually I found a letter, and it had my postcode on it, which I could read. And so anyway, they sent an ambulance for me, took me to hospital, and then it all became really dramatic. Like I remember being in the hospital, and at this point, I'd realised I couldn't read aloud. So the nurse came over, and she was like, "Can you read this sign to me?" And obviously, for me, from being an actor since I was 15, like reading scripts and reading aloud has been something that comes very easy to me. And I started to try and read this paragraph. And even though I could read it perfectly in my head, I could not say it. And I was stumbling and stuttering, and I just started crying. I was just like, what's going on? What is happening? And she said, you're presenting symptoms of a stroke. And that just fully pulled the rug out from underneath me. And I was like, surely not. Like, I'm 34 years old at the time. I was like, I can't have had a stroke. So they gave me a massive dose of aspirin, which is a blood thinner to stop. Because for people who don't know what happens when you have a stroke, it's a blood clot that gets to your brain.
Right.
And obviously, if the blood can't get to certain parts of your brain, if your brain doesn't get oxygen for a certain amount of time, it instinctively starts to die, basically. And so they gave me aspirin to kind of flush whatever blood clots were in my brain. It's still at this point, they'd not confirmed it. So they were like, we're going to keep you in hospital overnight. So actually, Ryan came down, Lloyd came down. And so they did an MRI scan. And the first MRI scan came back and they went, oh, it's fine. I was like, oh, amazing. But then I was like, well, but why can't I speak? Anyway, they decided to keep me in overnight. They did another MRI scan. And then I stayed in the hospital overnight. And then the doctor came to me at about lunchtime the day after. And he was like, you've had what is called a transient ischemic stroke, which is a TIA, which is a mini stroke. And I felt like my life was over, man. Like at that point, like I didn't like now I know a lot more about strokes, and I've been doing a bit of work with the Stroke Association and stuff. But I was just like, that's it. I was like, is my speech ever going to come back? Because at this point, I was still struggling really badly to speak, and I can't. It's a really lonely feeling, because I know perfectly what I want to say, but I can't articulate myself to you. And it's like, I could see, like when I was speaking to Ryan and to the doctors and stuff, they were like, what are you trying to say? And it was horrible. Absolutely horrible.
So what did they think brought that on, Chris?
Well, subsequently, I've found out since then.
Go on.
But so they kept me in hospital for a while. I'll kind of finish this part. They kept me in hospital for a bit, and then they decided to move me to the Royal London, which has got a specialist stroke ward. So that night, I'd been on this ward with all these people, and like I think it was like 2:00 in the morning. They moved me to this other hospital, and they put me like in like a holding room. Just when it was just the first time that I'd been on my own, without anybody around, none of my friends, none of the other nurses, and I fell apart, man. Like completely. I was like, my life's over. Like, is it going to come back? Like, is it going to get worse? Am I going to have another stroke? Like, I was all these questions. But the care that I received at the Royal London was incredible. They put me on this stroke ward, and I just looked after like you can't imagine. But after all that, so I came out of hospital, and then that's when all the tests started to see like what had happened. Because it can be from a lot of different things, a stroke, bad cholesterol, and like heart defects, which is what eventually it turned out to be. So I was in and out of hospital all the time for tests on my heart, tests on my blood, like constant testing. Because I'm so young, it's quite not normal that this had happened. So eventually, after all these tests, they found that I had like quite a sizable hole in my heart.
No way.
Which could be from birth. It could be developed, because I was like, oh my God, when the guy told me, he was like, you've got this hole in your heart. I was like, shit. And he was like, you know what? He said, it's actually a lot more common than people think. I think like 30% of people have a hole in the heart, but a lot of them will go through their entire life and never have anything happen, and you just kind of live your life. But what happened to me was this hole, a blood clot got through the hole and went straight up to my brain. And this is where like it sounds mental to say that I was lucky, but depending, obviously, different parts of your brain control different parts of your body. So I think it was the left-hand side where my blood clot went to. And basically what happened is, because it wasn't a major stroke. Like a major stroke is where the clot gets stuck for a long period of time, and that can have like devastating effects. Like you could lose the use of your arm, you could lose like your face can drop. Like I suffered with. So I found out recently, well, when I came out of hospital, that not being able to speak properly after a stroke is called aphasia. And there's levels of it, and I was very lucky that mine was quite low level, and my speech came back quite quickly afterwards. I mean, I had to see a speech therapist for a couple of months afterwards, and I'm still not. I know that I'm not 100%. Like a lot of people would never realize that I've had a stroke and that I've suffered with aphasia, but I feel it. And like I feel it, I still find it like a little bit difficult to read. I can now, and I can speak well and I can articulate myself properly, but there are times where I start to stumble over my words, usually when I'm tired and stuff. But it's something that I'm still kind of dealing with.
And what, you'll always have that for the rest of your life, or?
It depends, really. I mean, they say like after 6 months, that's about as much as you're going to recover. But I still feel like I'm recovering more.
It sounds like no matter how tough it's been in the past, you are now kind of exactly where you need to be. And even that fighting talk that you just talked about then, it gets me excited because I believe you.
Yeah.
And I already know, for example, you've already had some exciting auditions coming through. It's starting to happen now.
Yeah.
Talk me through some of the auditions that have been coming through now. And you're just before the stroke, you're in the runnings for a massive Netflix show.
Yeah, I've been. Do you know what? It's like I said before. I feel like I'm starting to get closer and closer to landing something that I really want to do. I mean, it's a tough time, man. Like with like the kind of like the boost that came after COVID, and everyone was making stuff, and there was loads of stuff going on. I mean, unfortunately, I didn't manage to land anything at that point. But it's kind of died out a little bit now, but there are still some really amazing things coming in, especially like with all the streaming services there are now. Like you've got Disney, you've got Apple, you've got Netflix. And I think I'm just keeping my fingers crossed every time, man. Like there was a period of time where I wasn't getting things and I was starting to not take my own advice and I was starting to get despondent. But
do you know what though, Chris? Don't keep your fingers crossed, make it happen.
Yeah.
I think that's the difference this time. And I think in the acting world, it's quite easy, isn't it, to kind of, not easy, but it's like almost the way it's meant to be. You kind of wait for the opportunity to come to you and wait for that phone call or whatever. Whereas with you now, I think you've got that fighting mentality. Go and barge down those doors.
It's so funny, man. Like, people have said it to me before in terms of like writing something for myself.
Create your own opportunities.
Exactly. But I think there's so many, like when I actually take a step out of myself and I look at what's like my life and the things that have happened to me, like we didn't really touch on like Dancing on Ice and stuff, but like performing at like MEN Arena, Wembley, thousands of people doing figure skating of all things. Like I never imagined that happening to me. And then just all these events that have happened throughout my life, like whether I actually write something in terms of a story of what's happened to me, or even just I use the emotion and the situations and just take things out because I've experienced a lot. I mean, despite I'm starting to feel a little bit older now, like my beard's going a bit grey and I'm 35, like I'm still quite young in terms of being an actor. Like I still feel like I've got a lot to offer.
It's frightening. People like Gerard Butler and all that, they didn't get started till they were very young.
I know, yeah. I mean, that gives me a massive amount of hope. Do you know what I mean?
100%. And Morgan Freeman and all those kind of people.
Yeah.
Chris, you are unbelievably talented. Like probably one of the most talented people I know. And in the acting space as well, every now and then, I don't see it often because you don't really show me that side to you anymore. But when I do see you, like, or a bit of a video or whatever else, I'm like, this guy is good. And the way that you treat acting like a craft and a skill, I think is admirable. And I think you should lean into that as much as possible. Never give up. Never give up on that.
It's just like you were saying as well, like using the platform. Like I've been very fortunate. Like I raised quite a good amount of money for the Stroke Association, which I was so proud of, man. Like I can't like stress that enough. How proud I was of doing the marathon, considering 8 months before. How long was it? August, September, October, November, December, January, February, March, April. 8 months before I did the marathon, I had a stroke.
Wow.
And like, because I've got this mindset now of, okay, something else has happened, we get up and we keep going. Like sometimes I need to kind of just step outside of that and just look at what I've achieved. And I'm not someone who does that very often. Like I say, I've just got this mentality now of just moving forward and just keep going, which is great. But sometimes my mum says it to me and my friends say it to me, like I just forget. And that when I actually look at what's happened and look how far I've come from not being able to speak to being able to sit and do a massive hours-long podcast and being able to articulate myself properly, sat in that hospital bed by myself, wondering if I was ever going to be able to speak properly again to where I'm at now. It's a massive deal. Do you know what I mean? And I am massively proud of myself.
I'm proud of you as well, mate. And I think like it's these moments like today, little milestones where you use them as momentum and as fuel to go on to the next thing and everything else. And
it ties in with the name of the podcast. It is learning as you go, because that's the only way you can do it. Obviously, you can study for something, but until a situation happens, and then you have to adapt and be like, okay, well, now I need to do this. Now I need to go to speech therapy. Now I need to get a training program for a marathon. I need to start like learning how to hydrate myself. And he's learning as I go. And I think I'll continue to do that for as long as I live, to be honest.
And I think sometimes we wait for like massive curveballs in life to come and test us, when sometimes it's good to go and test yourself and like push yourself out your comfort zone. And
I mean, I've even like, I got a real perspective when I came out of, I remember coming out of hospital with my mum, and we went to the Blind Beggar pub in London. I didn't have a beer because obviously I just had a stroke, so I had a non-alcoholic lager. And I remember just sitting there thinking, there was like a big, there was like this massive tree that was like over this beer garden we were sat in. And I remember just looking up at it and it gave me a new sense of perspective in terms of life. Like this stroke, if that blood clot had gone to a different part of my brain, or if it had been bigger, I could have died, or I could have completely lost my speech, or it could have been so much worse. Like there's people that I've met who've suffered strokes that have got absolutely like really devastating symptoms from it. And I feel really lucky, and it kind of gave me a new sense of purpose, because I just embrace everything now. Like I embrace everything. Like that could have been so much worse, that I feel like I owe it to myself that I have to grab everything with both hands. Like I started learning Spanish. I've started Brazilian jiu-jitsu. And even though it's not always like sunshine and roses and everything's amazing, I do have my times when I'm really struggling, and I battle with my depression and stuff like that. But like I said, I owe it to myself to enjoy life to the absolute maximum, because it can be changed and it can go like that. So I feel, like I say, it's something I owe to myself to be positive, to be present, and just take it by the horns.
And on that note, what a great way to end the podcast, man. That is the shit right there. Honestly, Fountain, man. Do you know what? That was just so beautiful to see Chris just regaining that lust for life that I think he lost for so long. And I was around when he got pretty much cancelled and his whole life came tumbling down. And it wasn't easy to watch. And I think we need to learn a lot from this whole cancel culture that is really promoted in today's society. Chris is a lovely human being, and he didn't deserve what he got. Yes, he made a mistake, but it's just so good to see him now coming back strong. He's even just overcome a stroke, and he's running marathons now. He's just got that energy, and he's so talented. And I'm predicting seeing him in bright lights one day and on that big screen. So Chris, if you're listening, keep doing your thing, mate. And thank you for joining me in the studio. I also want to say thank you to you for listening, subscribing, reviewing wherever you listen to your podcast. It means a lot. You've been so pivotal in this podcast doing so well. So I just want to say thank you. We're going to take a little short break over the next couple of weeks because we've got something big coming your way. I can't give too much away now, but make sure you stay tuned for that. But yeah, continue to tag me on Instagram as well. I love seeing all your takeaways from the podcast. But yeah, stay tuned. A couple of weeks' time, something special is coming your way. But until then, thank you for always supporting the podcast, and I will see you very soon.